Meditation will be led by Patricia Guy.
Good morning. I'm just curious, show of hands of how many people may have had a little trouble breathing the last week or two. Breathing, just that breath, sometimes is a little hard to get. It's made me really aware again this week of how important the breath is, especially at night when this is all clogged and you can't quite get a full one. So we're going to just take a few minutes just to breathe, just to appreciate that breath. Those who care to, you can have your eyes open or closed. And we're going to take 3 really deep breaths. As if the in-breath, as if it was your first breath. The out-breath, as if it was your last. We'll just take 3 deep breaths together. And now keep breathing with the awareness of that cloud from the mountain that's coming into our lungs right now is moisture. And allow that moist air to come into your lungs and your nasal cavities. And now 3 more breaths. Awareness that as you breathe in, we're receiving the gift of oxygen from these trees above us. And as we breathe out, we're offering carbon dioxide back to this tree. And we're giving and receiving together. And now allow your attention to wander to any part of your body that is feeling a little constricted, a little tight, maybe a little sore. And bring that healing breath to that area, inviting that area to relax and open. And now just a moment of 3 more breaths, just with appreciation for the gift of our breath of life. After all, it's the one thing we all have in common.
Oh, we might have something else in common. This week's presenter is Otto Rand, speaking on faith versus reason. He will argue that faith and reason can harmoniously coexist. They are not mutually exclusive. He examines the 4 major scientific challenges to religion and shows that all are met without discrediting either faith or science. Otto Rand was born in Slovakia 84 years ago. His childhood was spent hiding from the Nazis. After the war, he immigrated to Israel, where he obtained a degree in history from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Later, he obtained his MA in History of Religions from the University of Toronto, where he also completed his MED. Otto spent his lifetime as a teacher, principal, and superintendent of schools in Canada. He also taught the history of religions at the University of Toronto. In retirement in Ajijic, he frequently lectures and offers classes in the Bible and history of religions. We're privileged to have Otto Rand with us today. Can you turn him up a bit, please? I don't. Wait, you're not on yet. But now.
Well, wired. Okay. So as you were told, my topic is religion versus science. And I'm not the first person and the last person to talk about this topic, but I hope I have some kind of a contribution to make, because to think of it is one of the most important issues in our life. Particularly as we age, we start to be very interested in the relationship between divinity and us. And science, of course, is dealing with that all the time. So I hope that you will come out here not enriched, but at least and broaden your view of these issues. I'm sorry I'm slow. At the age of 85, you don't move or react fast as my body does. And there's a general assumption that science and religions are rivals, that you can attain the truth either through the study of the Bible or by believing in science. Yet science and religion are not necessarily antagonistic. A scientist can be religious, as many scientists were and are. A good example is Sir Francis Bacon, who is considered to be father of modern scientific thought. Sir Bacon was also a devoted Puritan, student of a theology which became a predecessor to later Reform. On the other hand, many religious people became scientists or philosophers. A good example is René Descartes, the French philosopher who promoted rationalism by declaring cognito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He was a deeply religious Catholic, yet he believed that God endowed us with a complex brain to use it in analysis of events and in seeking truth. So you see, the relationship here is that science admits that brain is a divine gift and that we have to use it in a proper way. These are only two examples of many. Perhaps the most famous person proving this dichotomy is one of the science's stars, Sir Isaac Newton, who was a religious man, although not a dogmatic Anglican. The religious aspects of his life were studied recently by a Canadian historian, Dr. Stephen Snowbellen, who left extensive literature on his prophetic and religious writings, which is, by the way, broader and wider than his scientific writings. In many ways, Albert Einstein was also a religious man. He did not practice Judaism, which was the religion of his birth, but he believed in a supreme power who made the universe abide by strict laws. People like him are called deists. He considered it unbelievable but doable that the behavior of the universe can be resolved by mathematical formulae. This itself he considered a miracle and a proof of a maker of the universe. His most famous statement on religion and science is, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Thus, in his view, he recognized a supreme power that designed and created the universe, but he did not believe in a personal God who interferes in the lives of people. So it's a rich person, but not a, but it's called beast. Of course, there are also scientists who are or were explicit atheists. The leading among them is Stephen Hawking, an English theoretical physicist, cosmologist, author and director of research at the Center for Theoretical Cosmology at the University of Cambridge. Hawking denies any intervention of a supreme being in the affairs of the universe. He, of course, does not believe in the concept of afterworld and predicts that the universe will self-destruct in 1,000 years. So don't worry, you have a lot of time. In spite of his views, he is a member of the Pontifical Scientific Academy, that consult the Pope on issues of science. But being a religious man does not prevent him from consulting the Pope. This dichotomy between science and religion is not the law, but the exception. Christianity, from its very beginnings, based itself about the universe, it based its beliefs about the universe on Greek science, which was called at that time philosophy. The shape of the earth, the plate, in which Christians believed, was based on teaching of Aristotle and Ptolemy. The Ptolemaic system assumed that the earth is the center of the universe, and all planets, including the sun, are revolving around it. This view prevailed for more than 1700 years. There were four major challenges to the biblical view of creation and the age of the universe. The first were the discoveries of Copernicus and subsequently Galileo, which showed the earth revolving around the sun. That didn't fit the biblical idea. It was very disturbing to the church, not only because it negated the long-held view, which became part of the Catholic faith, but also because it contradicted the Bible. The contradiction was minor. In a passage of the book of Joshua, Joshua calls on the sun and moon stop moving to give time to the Israelites to complete the defeat of the Amorites. But how could the sun and the moon stop moving if they did not move around the earth? Many centuries later, the biblical passage was reinterpreted as a plea of Joshua to the Almighty to prolong the day, which did not really happen. But in the meantime, Galileo died in home arrest, and his books were considered heretic and banned for more than 200 years. Copernicus' fate would have been the same if he did not die before his book on the planetary movements was published. Yet his book was also banned from the Catholic reading list. The ban was lifted in 1835, but the controversy was not resolved until the 20th century. It was in 1979 when the Pope John Paul I expressed the hope that theologians, scholars, and historians, animated by a spirit of sincere collaboration, will study the Galileo case more deeply and in loyal recognition of wrongs from whatever side they came. Yet the full vindication came only in 1992, when the same Pope brought in Observatore Romano. Thanks to his intuition as a brilliant physicist, and by relying on different arguments, Galileo, who practically invented the experimental method, understood why only the sun could function as the center of the world, and it was then known, that is to say, as a planetary system. The error of the theologians of the time, when they maintained the centrality of the earth, was to think that our understanding of the physical world structure was in some way imposed by literal sense of sacred scripture. Now, the literal sense of sacred scripture is a key to the understanding, because there is a way to understand sacred scripture, not in a literal way, but in interpretation. Actually, commentaries to the Bible were done since the beginning, since St. Augustine, until these days. Pope John Paul I pointed out that one of the major reasons for the numerous science and religious controversies was the literal reading of the Holy Scriptures. This manner of reading of the Scriptures remains only valid today in the most fundamentalist Christian groups and in some Hasidic Jewish groups. Most theologians of Judaism and Christianity have agreed on the need to interpret the Bible. Thousands of commentaries of the Bible have appeared since Philo of Alexandria in the 1st century AD introduced his allegorical interpretation of the Old Testament. The New Testament was not yet written at that time. A major contribution to the interpretation of the Bible was done by the medieval Jewish scholar Maimonides, who opined that the scriptures were written for all people, mostly uneducated, who would not relate to God's abstraction and needed some visual images like the hands of God or God speaking and hearing, although these were human and not divine attributes. He maintained that the complete spirituality and instruction of God could not be understood by the masses Bible was written for the masses. And a new challenge to church teaching came to the theories of Charles Darwin, who published in 1859 his book, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Followed in 1871 by even more controversial volume, The Descent of Man. In the first book, Darwin presented the body of evidence that the diversity of life arose by constant evolution of each species. The idea was supported by observation of species throughout various periods of time, and it basically meant that species, including humans, were improving their skills or appearances from generation to generation. This phenomenon did not raise much controversy because it could be visible, even though it was based on skeletal evidence, which were thousands and sometimes millions of years old. It raised the question of the age of the universe, but that has been overcome by most denominations through interpreting the days of the Bible, days of creation, as stages of creation. Sure, there always remain those who did not yield the literary interpretation of the day. Actually, the Jewish calendar is based on literal acceptance of all the days and ages mentioned in the Bible. So we are now in the year 5776 since creation, according to the Jewish calendar. While most churches reconciled with the idea of evolution of species, it was not the same with transmutation, introduced in Darwin's second book. Transmutation means that species developed from other species, having one common ancestor and branching out throughout the ages. The greatest opposition came with Darwin's assumption that humans branched out from a primal ape, and thus are in the physical sense cousins of a well-developed ape. This theory was vigorously criticized and fought practically by all Abrahamic religions. There were, however, exceptions. A contemporary of Darwin, American Asa Gray, who was a well-regarded botanist and also a firm believer in God, defended Darwin and even helped to publish his book in the USA. He claimed that people need to reshape the argument from design in such a manner as to harmonize our ineradicable belief in design with the fundamental scientific belief of continuity of nature, now extended to organic as well as inorganic forms, to living beings as well as inanimate things. He strongly advocated a new theological view of creation, of God working within the rules of nature he created and not violating them, and species be developed through transmutation, as Darwin has unquestionably proven. Still, ideas for transmutation of species conflicted in many minds with the belief that species are unchanging parts of God's design of living creatures, and that humans were unique, unrelated to other animals. The political and theological implications of Darwin's ideas were intensely debated. In the USA, the controversy between evolution by Darwin and creationism, as per the Bible, reached courts in several states. The plaintiffs demanded that the evolutionary theory taught in science classes should be suspended, or at least supplemented by the biblical creation account. In all cases, the courts upheld the teaching of Darwinian evolution on the basis of the First Amendment of the Constitution, separating the state from the church. The biblical account was obviously religious teaching, which was not allowed in public school. Eventually, the church became reconciled with evolution, with a caveat. Pope Pius XII confirmed there is no intrinsic conflict between Christianity and the theory of evolution, provided Christians believe that the individual soul is a direct creation by God and not a product of purely material forces. In other words, the soul is not transmuted from something else, it's given just to humans. Today, the church supports theistic evolutionism, also known as evolutionary creation, although Catholics are free not to believe in any part of evolutionary theory. Was Darwin an atheist? Many people asked this question, and some even wrote letters to him, requesting his explicit view on the issue. The following is one of Darwin's answers to a theologian who challenged him to express his view about God. And he writes to Holland, Mr. N. Dowds, a University of Utrecht, Holland. Dear sir, it is impossible to answer your question briefly, and I am not sure that I could do so even if I wrote at some length. But I may say that the impossibility of conceiving that this grand and wondrous universe with our conscious self arose through chance seems to me chief argument for the existence of God. But whether this is an argument of real value, I have never been able to decide. I am aware that if we admit a first cause, the mind still craves to know whence it came and how it arose. Nor can I overlook the difficulty from the immense amount of suffering through the world. But that's a problem that, of course, Job already dealt with. I am also induced to defer to a certain extent to the judgment of the many able men who have fully believed in God. But here again I see how poor an argument this is. The safest conclusion seems to be that the whole subject is beyond the scope of man's intellect, but man can do his duty in a spiritual way. With my best wishes for your success in life, I remain, dear sir, your faithfully Darwin. Now, you know, in this response, he is not saying that he doesn't believe in God, but he also expresses his problems with strict belief in divine, mainly because of all the suffering that is sees in the world, as if God would be responsible for suffering. But if God is not responsible for suffering, he is neither responsible for happiness. So there is a problem that needs to be resolved. He cannot resolve it. Since archaeologists and paleontologists unearthed more and more ancient skeletons of humans and caves in which the early humans lived and created art, the date of creation date of creation of human seemed to recede enormously from date calculated by biblical scholars. Instead of 6,000 to 8,000 years suggested by biblical literalists, it looks now that the first human skeletons date from some 50,000 years. The dating of paleontologists is calculated by infallible scientific methods, such as, for example, carbon-14, which is a radioactive isotope of carbon that exists in every organic material. But when the organic material dies, carbon-14 diminishes with time. Using this measurement, diminished amount of carbon-14, we can date fossil up to 50,000 years with an error margin of 5 to 10%. Other radioactive dating can be used for much older times. Since the remnants of human-like fossils come from a remote past up to 50,000 years, how do we reconcile them with the biblical dates? It again depends on the interpretation of the biblical dates. If the biblical day is understood as a 24-hour day, that would not advance toward a solution. However, most scholars of the Bible interpret the biblical day as an epoch. Actually, the Hebrew word for day, yom, lends itself to various translations, among them an epoch. Interestingly, the sequence of days of creation correspond precisely with the epochs or stages of development of the earth, as science proposes. First, rising from the primeval dust to allow the sun and moon to be seen, separation of the waters from dry land, appearance of plants, aquatic species of life, lower species of life on ground, and ultimately Adam, the first human being, either with Eve from the beginning, man that woman and created them, or according to another biblical version, Eve was created from Adam's rib. Since there were other people on the earth, attested by science, but also by Bible. After killing his brother, Cain moved to another land where there were other people, and he chose his wife from among them, so there were other people. The dilemma of the religion is which Adam of all these people was endowed with divine soul and placed in the Garden of Eden. Which Adam was it? Well, it is quite undeniable that human homos of some kind existed many centuries earlier, starting in South Africa, living in caves, developing into Homo erectus in Eastern Africa, who were able to produce tools, and then transforming into a Neanderthal man in northern Africa with higher intelligence, but ultimately defeated by Homo sapiens, who spread over Europe and Asia some 15,000 years ago. Our best assumption is that Adam and Eve were representatives of Homo sapiens. It is not necessary that one race of humans replace the others. Actually, they could coexist simultaneously. Unfortunately, the possibility allowed some races to propagate the theory that only the white man, according to them the Homo sapiens was the white European, was endowed with a divine soul, while other human species are different and inferior. These, according to the theory, their theory, were remnants of previous inferior human races and survived only outside of Europe, black, yellow, and red, and Australian aborigines. This was a common view of many American and British races. Yet in Jewish scriptures, this distinction among humans is totally denied. Why did God create only one Adam, asked a famous rabbi, so that nobody could claim that he has more noble ancestors than the other? We are all descendants of Adam, all of equal rank. There is actually no way to determine how Adam looked. Located in the Middle East, he was unlikely an athletic white man with blonde hair and blue eyes. Neither Jesus could be such a man. Personally, I accept the biblical version of creating an intelligent man, even though the Bible claims that the intelligence, distinction between good and bad, was acquired by sin. Truly, if God created man like himself, it must have been his intent to endow him with intelligence, maybe at a later stage. Why else would the Bible teach us that God decided to create man in his image? Certainly did not mean physical looks, since God, if you believe in him, is a spirit. In summary, the issue of old earth and new earth did not arise a great deal of controversy. All Abrahamic religions, except for a few fundamentalistic sects, were able to reconcile the religion with the science in that sense. Some fundamentalists explain the existence of ancient fossils to the story of the flood. Still, the flood, even if we accept that it was universal, lasted only 40 days, and the Bible dates it long, long after creation. A major blow to religious point of view could have been the Big Bang theory, according to which the universe started with an enormous explosion of a heavily loaded atom some 13.7 billion years ago. Interestingly, this theory was developed in 1927 by none other than a Belgian Catholic priest who was also a cosmologist, astronomer, and professor of physics. His name was Georges Lemaitre. Lemaitre based his calculations on Einstein's theory that the universe is constantly expanding and the distances between the planets are growing proportionately with the distance from the solar constellation. Lemaitre's logical conclusion was that if the expansion can be mathematically calculated, going backward can be also calculated in human time too. So going backward, he came to the conclusion that 13.7 billion years ago, the universe consisted only of one heavily loaded atom. When it exploded, all the universe started to rapidly expand. Lemaitre's discovery was hailed by the scientific world. Einstein himself declared that this was the most beautiful and satisfactory explanation to the creation I have ever listened to. Yet what was the religious response? One would assume that the religions would be extremely opposed to this daring theory. But it was not the case. Surprisingly, most Jewish and Christian institutions welcomed the theory. Pope Pius XII, for example, declared at the opening meeting of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences that the Big Bang theory does not conflict with the Catholic concept of creation. Now that's revolutionary. Some conservative Protestant Christian denominations have also welcomed the Big Bang theory as supporting a historical interpretation of the doctrine of creation. How come? The reason for this welcome was the earlier Aristotelian explanation that the universe existed from ever to ever, which was adopted by many early Christian fathers, even though it contradicted creation. This Greek idea made creation of the universe unnecessary, because it always existed. And here all of a sudden, modern science claims that there was a creation 13.7 billion years ago. The sixth day of creation Bible, as we have shown earlier, can only mean 6 stages of creation that would last this long time. The biblical description of creation, written in brief 12 verses, the main purpose of the verses is to indicate that God created the earth and everything in it on it, but not exactly how it was done. This interpretation of stages does not mean that some fundamental Christians and Jewish denominations did not reject the Big Bang theory. They did, but these are fringes and not the central institution of these religions. So what is the prospect of science and religion to live in peace and even cooperate with each other? One of the most liberal popes of all ages, John Paul II, expressed his hope in his encyclical letter, Fidem et Ratio, Faith and Reason. Faith and reason are like 2 wings on which the human spirit rises to contemplation of truth. And God has placed in the human heart the desire to know the truth, in a word, to know himself, so that by knowing and loving God, men and women may also come to the fullness of truth about themselves. So it's okay to investigate, to research, science. The cooperation between the 2 wings can exist only if each of them sticks to its territory. And they are not the same. As Galileo stated, the Holy Spirit taught us how to reach heaven, what behaviors will lead us to salvation, but not how the heavens work. I believe strongly that God endowed us both with reason and that works through examination of evidence and requiring proof, but also with a soul that works through belief and compassion. May I remind us that the most important commandment in the Bible, in the Old and New Testament alike, is, you shall love your proxy like yourself. This commandment has to do with our feelings and not with science, but it also has a rational dimension, survival of humanity. Without this law implemented, humanity will not survive. Now we need to use our reason to figure out how to achieve this goal. So reason and heart work together. They are not the same, but they are supplementary. And this is basically the idea of not having controversy between science and religion. Religion is very, very important, particularly if people reach the age of 85, like myself. And then you start to contemplate about your life, how did you live, what was good and bad about it, and you also think of it, what is happening after that. You will never figure out, because nobody came back from there, but you will be interested in areas that you never thought about when you were 20 years ago, when you were 20 years old. So I believe strongly that it's the soul in us, it's endowed by God, that makes us different from other creatures, and that allows us also to view emotional things, or to have emotions, and to be interested in doing well, doing good in the world. And also, of course, the science is critical, because it leads the way to understanding how the world works. Not why the world works, but how the world works. So I think with this I can more or less complete this lecture. And I want to also direct you to a most recent study by Dr. Francis Collins, which is called The Language of God. Dr. Francis Collins was a pastor and later became a scientist of great importance. And he was the head of the genealogical institute, the World Institute of Scientology, I think, so whatever it's called. But his book, The Language of God, is exactly on this topic. And if you can get it, you will be also very interested to read it. It's a very interesting book. So I hope that I did not offend anybody, and I hope that my explanation can lead to more understanding of between religion and science, and not vice versa.
not all right? All right. We're going to take some questions now.
Comment.
Please.
This-
Maybe comments too. Well, the thing is, raise your hand and someone will bring you a mic and state your question. And I'm going to repeat it for Otto because he may find that he is part of your,
Yeah.
so he'd like me to repeat the question.
Thank you for your brilliant talk. Houston Smith, who was the great world religionist who just died in December at the age of 97, made a comment about science and religion, saying that both could be closed systems unless we thought of science and religion as scientism and religionism. Rather, that's the opposite. When it becomes an ism, then it becomes this prescribed closed system. So scientism and religionism are closed systems, whereas religion and science are really trying to find out the answers to life, but in different ways. Would you comment on that?
Yeah. So that's exactly, that confirms what I'm saying, that both science and religion are different areas, very important in themselves, but they are not conflicting with each other. I agree with that.
I'm so glad you can hear. You heard.
Yeah, I heard
John's
this
question.
Yeah. But sometimes
I could not
stay
repeat
next
it.
to me.
Stay next. Okay, I'm right here.
Okay, thank you very much, Baruch. I'm sorry I don't remember the other names, but that one's stuck in my mind. We seem to know, and you talked about it, a lot about how we came to be. But you, at the end, like so many, avoided the question of what will become of us when we shed this mortal coil. And like you, at 86 and I'm at 76, are more concerned at this point about what will happen when we go. And like my friend, a priest whom I asked once, Don, you know about these matters? What happens when I die? We were playing golf, and after he teed off and looked at me and said, it will be a great surprise. So what have you figured out so far that you can share with me?
Unfortunately, I don't think there is an answer to this question. There is any human being that can answer this question. Nobody returned from there yet, and we don't have any evidence, scientific evidence of that. We can believe, and the faith leads us to different conclusions. That's a place of compensation for good and bad. That when you die, so they will judge you. If you had a good life, you will be in the paradise. But that's not a scientific theory. We don't have a scientific response to that.
Yeah, I think it's pertinent to mention an atomic physicist who combined these two ideas. His name was Max Planck. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in the early part of the 20th century. And when he, in his speech, when he received that prize, he said this: in my research on atoms, I have discovered that there is no matter as such, that all matter is held together by an intelligence that I would describe as the matrix of all matter. And I think that speaks to what you have said. Now, I want to say what I've experienced as a scientist. So, no, I don't have questions. I just have that comment. Yeah. And my comment is my experience of being a scientist and experiencing spirituality. And I don't want to take a lot of time with this, but I was taught as a veterinarian, and it was all mathematics, physics, and chemistry until I was awakened by the spirit in me. And what I experienced in that was unequivocally there is a spirit that complements science. And we've heard that medicine is an art based on scientific principles. And I have experienced that complement for 41 years. And it serves me all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next,
Oh, here.
there's people that way too.
My question is, did the Big Bang create God, or did God create the Big Bang? And if the latter, what created God? My basic question is, do people believe that God always existed, or that God was created? And if God was created, wasn't always here, was created, what created God? You know, you have to explain that.
Well, we assume that there is no creation of God, that God existed from ever to ever. It's an unproven theory, but it's a logical assumption. Something had to exist before the rest existed. So we assume that divine power, energy, or whether it is, created the Big Bang, but existed before that. And in which form and way, none of us can understand properly. We don't know enough about that. We are just limited human beings with limited understanding. But certainly, logically, there had to be something prior to the creation.
All right, next question, over here.
I want to thank you for your talk. You've inevitably gotten people to the point where put those worms back in the can, please. I have a question. Have you read any of the Chronicles by Zechariah Sitchin? And if so, what is your opinion?
Which Chronicles?
Earth Chronicles, also War of the Pyramids.
No, I did not read them. But I will now that you recommend.
Thank you. I was lost. This is where you are.
I was thinking about how we all came from stardust in some sort of way. You know, all the elements of which this earth and our bodies and everything is composed, came from the stars in some way or another, and the expanding universe theory. And I wonder if that sort of indicates that God might also be evolved.
She said that she was thinking about how we came from stardust and whether that might indicate that God is an evolving, expanding idea with the universe.
Well, I don't know whether we came from stars or not. It's not something that the science has even proved or even dealt with in seriousness. I know there is some kind of a fiction that maybe we came from some stars, but I don't think there is a proof of it. Did I understand well your question?
I was not talking about people coming from stars. I was talking about the elements we're made of came from the stars, not like aliens.
Well, if the Big Bang is a real theory, so everything started from that. There was one atom, one tiny atom that exploded, and everything came out of it. It didn't come from other stars, but the stars came out of that. All the stars came out of that, according to a theory. Now, it has to be proven yet whether the universe did not exist before 13.7 billion years. But it's very hard to prove. The theory of the Big Bang is based on the fact that the universe is constantly expanding. And something is expanding, you can go backward and you can find the initial stage of expanding, and that was an atom. But whether there were other stars or other things in the world at that time is not known by this theory, and is not assumed by this theory.
As a Buddhist, we do not believe in God per se, that it is a force that permeates all living things, and yet as this force comes into being and goes like waves on the ocean, each one of us has an identity that we grow up with, we age, we die, and we'd go back to the pool, if you will, of this universal energy. And that's my comment to you. And how do you see that from a standpoint of a belief in God?
Well, I don't see the nature of God as physical. I see it as a spiritual power. It's a major power that actually exists all over, inside us and outside us. I think that God is not directing every step of us because we have free will. We can do whatever we want. But I think that God in some ways sets the rules of motion of the world. And, you know, all the nature that you see around you, these beautiful trees and mountains and lakes, they prove the existence of something that has created it. So I think that while you cannot define the nature of God, you can sense the nature of God in yourself and in the environment that you see.
Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. Can you comment on a personal issue of how you dealt with your spiritualism and your religion, faith, during the Holocaust and fleeing in Nazi Germany?
Well, I am a deist, and I believe in God, but I don't believe in God's involvement in human lives. Not in the sense that He directs people to do good or bad. That's a choice that we have, and there was the choice of the Nazis to do something. There are other people now who are doing terrible things, but it's not directed by God. It's judged maybe later on, but we don't know. In any case, we cannot charge or make God responsible for all the actions of humanity, bad and good. It's our choice, it's choice of the people that we are, and we are responsible to react to the evil in this world. It's our responsibility, and promote the goodness.
We'll have one more question.
Over here.
If there is, or we
Here.
Okay.
You need to speak in the microphone, Ross.
You people will have a problem with this. I believe it. I believe in the principle of God, but there never was a God. There never was a Jesus Christ. Did not exist. I'm sorry.
Well, it's all respected what you believe in. Every belief is a highly respected thing.
One more back there.
Thank you, everyone, for your very thought-provoking comments. I think it's a spiritual search that is worth going on, whichever path you take, to try to understand what God is and what man's purpose in life is. One comment I would like to throw out is, and it's been mentioned here before today, is that God is spirit. Now, humanly, we see ourselves as material beings, but all of us know that love is a quality that cannot be defined materially. And I would encourage all of you to see God as a spiritual quality that can't be defined materially, but if you understand that God is spirit and all good, and turn away from trying to define God materially, your search is going to be much more rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Otto. It was a very well, we hope you will come next week, and thank you for coming today. Please pick up and dispose of your coffee cups and stack your chairs. Take your conversations outside so they can efficiently close up. Thank you.